Welcome to the August 20th, 2024 Club Cubase live stream. My name is Greg Undo, and I am the host of the live stream today. If you have not attended a live stream before, how it works is you can submit questions in the live chat field or simply ask questions by sending an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, if we could specify which version of Cubase you're running, so if it is Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, that information is helpful. If you're running version 11, 12, 13, and which operating system, so if you're running Mac OS or Windows, that information is also helpful. When asking questions, realize my ability to answer questions in a real-time manner may soon be eclipsed, depending on how many questions we have. So if you don't see an immediate response to your question, if we could simply refrain from asking the same question over and over again, that would be appreciated. It just kind of slows down the whole process overall. And we'll get through all the questions chronologically as they are asked. If you, several hours after the live stream ends today, we should have an index of all of the topics covered in the live stream today with timestamps pinned to the top of the comments field. So you could quickly navigate to particular topics that way. And if you wanted to search for topics been covered in other live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com, and we want to thank Jan for creating a website that you could search. There's over 34,000 different topics. I also have a PDF file if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de that I'd be happy to share as well. It's kind of a global list of all of the topics. So we also have two people that serve as moderators. So we have Agent K and Jazz Dude. So we'll give special thanks to them. They're not Steinberg employees. They do it out of the goodness of their hearts. We also want to give a special kudos to Jazz Dude for his work with the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord. And that's just a wonderful resource of information that's available for the Steinberg community, different links to tutorials, articles, and videos. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America. I primarily work for focusing on Steinberg products. And I'm the host today. I'm presenting from outside of Washington, D.C. area in the United States, in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you're watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. And with that, we will go ahead and get started. All right. So first up, the first comment was from Tim K, who's just joining from Zeist in the Netherlands, where him and his cat Buddy are sending greetings, and Buddy is sending greetings to my cat Steven, who's taking a nap upstairs. I'll let him know that he has an international pen pal in the Netherlands. All right, so we see Stefan checking in from Sweden. We have Jan also from Stockholm, or also in Sweden in Stockholm. From cubaseindex.com. Wonderful to see Jazz Dude. We have John Costigan checking in from saying hello to everyone in Cubase land from Kenosha, Wisconsin. We have Uno Memento, who's usually based in Finland, who's sending greetings from Riga in Latvia. And it says his Baltic tour is over and he can focus on making music. All right, we'll have our celebrity audio engineer, Jean-Marie Horvat, joining us from Los Angeles. Great to see you on. Hope you're doing well, buddy. All right. So we have a question from Sandeep Bandari. How can we download loops from Google for Cubase 13 Elements? So, once we, we'll see if we can find a loop here quickly. So I'll go to my browser. We'll say drum loop. All right, so we'll just do drum loops free. So we'll go to a site, we'll download something. Let's see if we never really used this site, but as soon as we would just come over here, let's see if I have to, I don't want to create an account. Okay, so let's say if we have a drum loop here, I'm going to download this drum loop. So once I would have a drum loop downloaded anywhere on my system, I'm not going to create an account to do it for demonstration purposes, but then all we would have to do is come over here and go to import audio file, and then you could just navigate to wherever your downloaded loop is, and that will import it into a particular project. So let's say I think I could find a quick drum loop from my Finder or Explorer. So I'll just come over here. Let's say we'll go to Groove Agent SE, and let's go to audio, and let's say, okay, we have a drum loop here, so we could import that particular drum loop, and I'll just do it from a new project. And we would just come over here to import audio file and direct it directly right to where your drum loop is. So let's say, okay, I want to come, and now we have our audio file drum loop that we had downloaded from online. Make sure it's all legal and you have access to it, but now we can and then you could just import it just like that. So once you have the download, just go to File to import audio file, and then direct it to wherever you downloaded that drum loop to, and then from there you could have it inside of your project. Okay. All right, so you see how to connect Cubase running in Master and Pro Tools in Slave so that the instrument track MIDI note get corresponding audio track in order to mix in Pro Tools after composing in Cubase. So, so you know, if you want to, if you're taking the audio out, so what a lot of people would do if you have like a project with lots of audio going on, and you know, I don't think there's any need to mix in a different DAW other than Cubase, but you know, unless you have an audio interface with lots of inputs and outputs, probably the best approach if you're going to mix in, even if in someone else's facility who maybe has completely different set of plugins, would be just to maybe select your different tracks here. And if we want to go to, there's a couple of different approaches. One is we could do an export audio mix down. We could select multiple, and I could say, okay, I want my flute, oboe, and bassoon tracks to be rendered. And at this point, what we could do is I'm going to choose multiple, and I could select all my tracks and basically make stems. So we'll do a couple of tracks here, and I'm going to choose to create audio tracks. So we're going to make sure none of these are record enabled. So again, export audio mix down. And that would do it for where we have our left and right locators. I will set my left and right locators for a longer area for demonstration purposes here. So let's say I want to do my export audio mix down. I'm going to take those 3 tracks. We're going to choose to create audio tracks from them. So if you wanted to do kind of a straight, you know, like audio out to audio in, you would probably need to have a really high number of inputs and outputs for your audio interface. If you're kind of treating it like a source going from a tape machine into a mixer, if you wanted to do that paradigm, I think it's best to be able to just simply take all of your tracks and render them in one, because there's lots of features and functionality that will be in Cubase that's not going to be available in other DAWs. So at this point, I would render it as audio, because every DAW, even basic ones, will have the ability of just simply inputting and standard audio files, so that we don't have to worry about it. So, and it shows kind of like, so now we have our audio files that are all completely rendered. We have our stereo mix. We could also just listen to flutes, oboes, bassoons. So we could just have all those rendered and take these audio files into the other program, and that's kind of a fail-safe way of doing it. So if you were thinking of, having, unless you have, a lot of audio interfaces may not have, 64 inputs and outputs, and depending on the number of tracks, I would choose to render all of the different files in Cubase and make stems so that they could easily be imported, and you could import it back into Cubase as well. So. All right. Let's see. We see Tim Weinheimer from Mission Viejo, California, says that Dom Zagales had a funny video of a crazy customer story. So I'm sure everyone that's done studio work has a crazy customer story. All right, and we have Mati Rojas checking in from Chile. Thanks for joining us. And we have Fly V. Vince is checking in from Winnipeg, Canada. And we have Andre checking in from Germany. Daniel checking in from Munich. All right, Mati Rojas asks, I've tried a lot of DAWs. I'm in love with Cubase. The only thing that's bothering me is that it doesn't show the automation line of touch parameter of third-party plugins automatically. So yeah, how this works is it's part of the VST3 specification. So let's say if we have a plugin on a particular track, so it's, so it's one of these areas that a lot of plugin developers don't utilize. But it's part of the VST3 specification. So if I have a plugin on a particular track, whether it's a third party or a built-in plugin, and let's say, okay, we come over here to our multi-tap delay, and I wanted to automate a particular parameter, that we could come over here. So let's say we go to our phaser, and I wanted to now show the automation line of this. So at this point, we could just say, show the phaser rate loop within the multi-tap delay, and that would automatically open up that particular automation lane. So if, so Cubase has support for it, and if you notice that your third-party plugin doesn't have or doesn't respond to that, then you should reach out to the third-party plugin and tell them to implement all the VST3 functionality so you could do that. So, all right, and we have K-Strings Fretless checking in from Nigeria, who says he's happy to be here. You see also just a follow-up comment from Mati Rojas, says in the fastest way is recording and then editing. So yeah, so if it's it's one of those, we created the standard and the standard's implemented, but a lot of third-party plugins haven't implemented that. So I know it could be frustrating, but it's really just, check with your third-party plugins and companies and let them know that they should fully implement the VST3 functionality. All right, so we have Mike Braley. He says, I have Cubase 13 Pro. I use Focusrite 6i6 first edition. Cubase will not find the interface. I rebooted, reinstalled both Cubase and the Focusrite drivers, other DAWs. Find it. Any ideas? So I'm not sure if you're running on Mac or if you're running on Windows, but generally anything that is available and is recognized by the operating system, you should be able to utilize within Cubase, and realize that the other programs, depending if you're running on Mac, you'd be running the core audio drivers. On Windows, you'd be running the ASIO driver. So on the Windows platform, you could try to see if it's being utilized by the Windows driver or the ASIO driver. If you go to the studio setup and select the audio system and see if it is showing up here. So if you're not seeing it in the list here, that would indicate that there's a driver installation issue. If it's being utilized in the list here, if you see it in the list but it's just not passing audio, if you have other programs that might be open that could be accessing the audio interface, try to toggle the check mark here for release driver when application is in background. But if you could share some more information, and I've seen a number of Focusrite interfaces that tend to over time stop work, and then people go buy a new Focusrite interface and say it's kind of the first edition. So sometimes that happens as well. But let us know which operating system you're running. If it's you says other DAWs find it, but if you're using the ASIO driver or just using kind of the standard Windows driver for that. All right, Zion B asks, hey Greg, if I use pre-roll set to 1 bar and place the playhead where I want the recording to start, the recording also starts 1 bar earlier. Is there a workaround? All right, so let's take a look. All right, so let's add a quick audio track here. All right, so let's say we're starting at measure 3. Let me just put in. Okay, so we have our pre-roll, and we've now activated pre-roll. So when we hit play, it'll go back 1 bar. So let's say at this point we hit record. So if you activate maybe the punch in and punch out, so I'm going to hit the letter I, and let's say if I have this set for my left locator set there and I hit record, and I'll just go ahead and arm this track. So I'm going to hit record. Then it will just punch in directly based on the left and right locators. Let's see if I deactivate punch in. We just okay, so we'll go here. I deactivate punch in. It looks like when I just hit record, so if I'm right here, so without the punch in or punch out activated, I hit record. So let's say I want to start recording at measure 3, and we have a 1 measure pre-roll that's activated. When I hit record, that I get the 1 measure, and it doesn't start recording until measure 3. Let's see if we decouple that from. So let's say if I go to measure 4, if it's going to be tied to the locators. So there with pre-roll active, and I'm just hitting the asterisk key on the numeric transport, or if I just hit record here. So at this point, it's going to pre-roll for one measure and start recording, let's say in the middle of the bar here. So it'll roll back one measure and then just record right from that very particular moment where the play position was. So let me know if I'm doing something differently than you are. But it seems to kind of work as expected for me. That's from SciMB. All right, so we have Fresh Music Entertainment says, what Mac do you have? So it's just a MacBook Pro M1. So I think I have 64 gigs of RAM. So it's an Apple M1 Max. I think I have a 2 terabyte drive, 64 gigs of RAM. So it's about, I would say, 2 years old at this point. So it seems to work really well. So been happy with the performance, as I am also with my i9 that I run in my personal studio. All right, so we have Millard Brown checking in from Pennsylvania in the United States. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Uno Momento wants people to whack the like button. All right, and we have Thomas Lundstrom checking in from Sweden as well. Thanks for being on. All right, we see Robbie Bowling checking in from Dallas, Texas. All right, so we see Mike Braley. Let me see if I could. Okay, so it says Focusrite interface. It's Mac Pro 2012 and says it was working until the latest update. So let me know, Mike, do you see it? If it was the latest Cubase update, but do you see it as an available option when you go to select it in Cubase here? So let me know if you see the Focusrite interface there. But I don't think there's anything in the latest update that changed how it works with Core Audios. It's kind of just interfacing at the operating system level. All right, wonderful to see you, Val. Checking in from Vienna, Austria. Thanks for joining us today. Millard Brown says the like button has been whacked by him, so that's good. All right, so Val asks, in supervision in the bit window, what do the R and L stand for, and what is happening when they turn read or red? Is it clipping? So, all right, so let's go ahead and I will just do a quick. All right, so I'm going to keep my output level here at 0. Let's come and on this track, I'll turn down my control room volume and we'll just put a meter or a signal generator plug-in. Okay, so right now we can see that my test tone is at minus 12 dB, which we see reflected here. I'm going to, on my master output, I'll just turn that down so it's less annoying to listen to. So let's come over here to the inserts, and we'll put the supervision on, and I think the bit meter. Okay, so we can see that right now, so I think this is the left channel and right channel. So everything that we're doing at this point is in 32-bit floating point because that's what the engine is. So this is just showing the bits. So I think that this would just be the left and right channel. So let's say if we pan this source, we'll see that if we pan it all the way to the left, so we can see kind of our bit meters directly here. And so if we go back to panning like so, so at this point we can see that we're, using 32-bit floating point because we're running our project in 32-bit floating point. So the left, the L and R are just going to be for the left and right channel to show the bit depth that's going on in that particular channel. So let me know if that makes sense. All right, wonderful to see Real Raven 2000 checking in from Ireland. It was like an early attendee of Club Cubase live streams. Great to see you back. All right, so you see fresh music entertainment. I keep having CPU overload in my MacBook. What Mac are you using? I might need to upgrade. Mac is from 2019 and is up to date. So, it could be where, so depending on, like what you're doing. So let's say we have, a number of audio tracks here. So I will say we have 16 audio tracks. So, one thing to be aware of is that, some processes. So let's say if I wanted to, we'll open up our audio meter that, kind of like we often see like a multi-core performance meter, isn't going to be the same thing as like what your audio performance is. So how you scale different plugins. So as I come over here, if I put, let's say, one plugin, like a heavy plugin, on all of the tracks here, and I will just enable Q-Link. So let's say on one of the inserts, I'm going to input a delay across. Let's do like a multi-tap delay. And let me just add this across 16. So this could be a pretty beefy plugin. So let's come over and select all of my channels here. So now we've added like 16 multi-tap delays across our tracks here. And we can see that as we look at our performance meter, that this is automatically, every time in a particular track, it's going to be allocating our performance. So each of these tracks can then utilize a new CPU processing core. So if we undo that, and we see our meters here are pretty small, but now if we load everything up onto a single track, and let's say I put 16 different multi-tap delays on a single track, that you'll notice that since this one track can only utilize CPU core, that can add a significant CPU increase across our system. So we'll just add some more of these delays. So it could be how how the plugin processing is being utilized in your system. So, I had an i9 MacBook Pro, which was like 2018, 2017. But, if you're running like one instance of a multi-timbral instrument that doesn't do CPU scaling, then, one instrument can take one CPU core. So if you run a lot of different sounds in one instrument, and that instrument is not set up, which the vast majority are not, to utilize multiple CPU cores, then that could do the scaling could be different. So as I would load up, like let's say 16 multi-tap delays, this CPU would be higher than as we were just kind of playing back across 16 tracks as well. So it could be how the CPU, how the plugins are being allocated versus and how the processing happens in every single DAW for accessing those. But my current system is again just going to be, and this is over 2 years old now. It wasn't the fastest when I got it, but just looking at so it's just an Apple M1 Max with 64 gigs of RAM. So Okay, so we have Myron Feltner Jr. asks, please address what I believe to be a bug where when I select several audio events and use the split command, the cuts are not accurate. Okay, so let's jump to some. So there could be a couple of things. One thing kind of pops to mind. And I'm not sure exactly what you mean by not accurate, but let's say if I'm here and I'll take all these outside of a folder, so that's not an impact. So let's say if I want to select these particular tracks and we go to edit, and I think that we could just go to like split. So we'll say split at cursor. So as we come over here, let's say we split at the cursor, and I'll make each of these larger so we could. So, and as we zoom in, you may notice that some of the splits may actually occur at slightly different areas if we have. So I'm going to activate snap to zero crossing. So what a zero crossing, and it's this little icon right here, what the zero crossing is that it's only going to make the cut when the audio waveform is at the zero crossing here, so that we don't get clicks and pops. So now that I have this turned on and I do a split, so we can see that as we've zoomed in here, that we're not at the zero crossing, maybe this file and that file. But now when I come, we'll go to our functions and we'll say split at cursor, that it could be off depending on the snap to zero crossing. So as we would kind of zoom in, you may notice that it might be slightly off, and that could be to mitigate unwanted pops and clicks when you do edits. So if I wanted to come here and we have this turned on, and we can say let's cut right here, that we may notice that some of the cuts aren't going to be aligned because these cuts are designed to not cause an audible pop or click. But if we undo that and I turn off my snap to 0 and I split, that now all of the splits will be aligned, but with the snap to 0 when I split, that those edits may not be aligned as you zoom in, just depending upon the snap to 0. So let me know if that's kind of what you're seeing or if it's something else, and I'd be happy to take a look at it. All right, so we see Fresh Music Entertainment just says thank you. All right, and we have West Star Media checking in from Solihull, England. Thanks for joining us. I'm sure I mispronounced that and butchered the pronunciation. All right, so we see Real Raven 2000 says he's been on a PCI 9 forever and he wants to get a MacBook Air for the road. M processors are amazing. So this is his iPad Air, runs extremely smooth and he uses it for Cubase. All right, Mike Braley is going to look and let us know about and see if the focus rate is showing up in the list. All right, so we see Ed Rugman, which just says, hi Greg, do you have any pearls of wisdom for scoring multiple cues for video in Cubase? Any workflows that, for example, Hans uses one project per cue, then a master project with all cues bounces in video. So I think most people, and it may not, in talking to some like TV composer friends, traditionally there's been kind of one project per cue because that's how they kind of work, and that's how the work is kind of divvied out to the composers. It's like, this is your cues that you have, start working on this, start working on this cue, start on this, and they may often have one project per cue. Then they deliver the audio and it's often assembled by the post-production mixer. So they'll deliver their stems in cues, and then those stems will be reassembled. So like bigger productions, that's how it's going to work. TV shows, most bigger films, that's how it's worked. The composer is not necessarily doing all the assembly. I realize that in our world where we're doing more and more work, that most people would tend, that there could be a tendency. It's like, before you would never mix, engineer, and master. Those are three processes. But in the age of computers and client expectations, that you just kind of do it all, that you work that way. So I have had some friends that will, some TV, and they're, in all fairness, like an hour-long TV show might be 40 minutes in a project. So I do have some friends that have, for like, an hour-long TV show, will work everything in a particular project, if, in one single project, if they actually have all of it. But generally it's like just little short cues that are delivered to the composers. Like, here's this cue that's 2 minutes and 30 seconds, write the music for this one's 7 minutes before there's a commercial break, or before there's a scene, or a particular scene isn't fully edited. So often most people I see are working with like one project per cue, and then someone else is doing kind of the final assembly, probably the on larger projects. So all right, wonderful to see Brian Sawyer from Beulahville, or outside Wilmington, North Carolina. Glad you can make it today. All right, so we see from Val, says, thanks, Greg. Unfortunately, sometimes I get a red indicator where the L and R stand from 1 through 32, everything like yours. So I think this might be with the left and right locators. So if you run into like where the left and right locators in your project for punch in and punch out are So if where you see like little red lines, what you could do is if you kind of turn, so we could lock the punch points. So let's say if we come here, and maybe the red indicators are the punch points. So if we come here, we could say let's activate the punch in and punch out. So what punch points will allow you to do, and you could activate these in the transport, is to basically have an independent. So let's say we were doing a 2-bar. So we had like our left and right locators, because it used to be that the left and right locators were intrinsically tied to the punch positions. So I'll move my, okay, so let's say we had a 2-measure section that we were looping. So if it's these little red lines that you're kind of talking about, so let's say we have 2 measures and we wanted to give the musicians 2 measures of context. But what we could do now is just come over here and say, okay, I'm going to decouple a quick preference here. Sorry. Get to the right preferences or settings on later Mac OS versions. All right, so I'm going to set my left and right locators for like 2 measures, but I just want it to do a punch in not tied to those particular locators. So I'm going to select a small portion where we need to do a punch and go to transport, and I'm going to say set punch points from selection range. So if we have an audio event here that's set for record, we can cycle 2 measures and then punch in within the context of the cycle. So these red parts are the punch in. So instead of the entire cycle being the punch in, punch out points, we could have the punch in and punch out within the cycled audio that's playing back for the musician. So maybe the little red indicators that you mentioned, Val, maybe that is those. And then you could also just come here and choose to lock the punch in to the particular events with this little kind of a padlock looking icon in the transport. But check to see probably those red triangles that you mentioned are going to be in the punch points. So try those and let me know if that makes sense for you, if I'm completely misunderstanding. All right, get my computer to wake up that I read the questions from. Hang on. Sorry, I have a separate computer that I use for questions. I hope it's not doing a software update. It's not responding now. Hang on, sorry about this. And my questions aren't, let me see if I can get it from my phone. Go through some of the questions here. All right, so I'm going to try to do the questions from my phone. Sorry about this. All right, so we have Jimmy Garcia says he's Jimmy Brown from Spain. Thanks for joining us. And he is using Cubase Pro 13 with the Focusrite. All right, so we have Ed Rugman just as who asks, any idea why track waveforms are disappearing randomly when shared between Windows and Mac? Opening the Windows project on Mac, some of the waveforms disappear. Opening on PC, the waveforms are missing too. Okay, so check to see, like, when we go into the pool window. So I've never had an issue with the waveforms disappearing. So I'm not sure if you're doing a backup project or if you're manually copying the files over. But if we go to our pool window, you may notice that if you have files, and as we kind of scroll over, like here we can see our waveform image in kind of the image column. And if you have a file here, you could try to come over and like select the files that don't have an image. So I think even if we come in, we select our files here. Get the right keyboard. That you could choose to, there's like a reconstruct image. Yeah, just choose to reconstruct the image and see if that makes any difference. But I've never had it, not carry the image over as part of the audio files, but it is a separate file. So try selecting all of the files there and see if you could just choose to reconstruct the particular image right there. Right, I think my computer's maybe waking up. All right, let me go to the next question. Hang on, I'm just gonna try to go back to my computer. It's woken. Let me just see if I could log back in my monitor and computer, so I have to read it from my phone. All right, so I think I'm back. Sorry about that. It's kind of strange. All right, find my spot. All right. Okay, so we see from Real Raven 2000 says trying to get back to using my Nectar Panorama P1. Tracks go haywire when there are two tracks with identical names. It says, Greg, any way to find them in the project I was sent? Haywire equals syncing tracks, gets stuck on Nectar, gets confused by equal track names, ND junks, and jumps around. So if you need to search for particular tracks, one of the things you could do, there's always the little search tracks function. So if you hit, let's say if we come over, I think it's just Command F. Get my keyboard to work. But if you just come over here, so yeah, Command F. And then if you wanted to search for particular tracks, so you say, okay, I'm looking for kick, you could just type in the particular name and kind of filter out your particular tracks like that. But I will see if I could get my Nectar to kind of misbehave. I don't have kind of the main control software. It just kind of uses kind of more of a dumb controller. So. Okay, so we have inactive user. Just says, hi Greg, is it possible to create a macro to direct process more than one plugins onto a vocal track, like noise gate followed by EQ followed by compressor and so on? I want to do all that processing. Okay, so let's say so we don't have to do it as a macro, but let's come over to our audio and we'll go to direct offline processes. So we'll come over here to our direct offline processing. I'll go ahead and delete some of these. So once I have a chain, so I'll add a plugin. So I'm going to select an audio file here. So we'll take this clip. Let's add a plugin. So in the chain you have is going to be a gate. So we'll go to our dynamics and we'll choose a noise gate. And let's say we have this dialed in. I want to followed by EQ. So let's go to our studio EQ, let's say for instance, and we have that as our EQ, and then a compressor. So we'll add in our plugin, go to our dynamics and say, okay, we want to do our Vox comp. Okay, so if we have these three here, what we could do now is select these three, and we have this little processes. So I'm going to take these three particular plugins and drop it down here. We're going to say vocal chain. We'll try not to shout at everyone, but caps lock on. Okay, so now we have vocal chain, and this vocal chain preset is going to be the combination of all of these particular plugins. So I'm going to select this, and let's delete all of those processes. So I still have this as my preset. So I want to now come over. We can do this from our MIDI key commands. So I think that we'll come over here to direct offline processing favorite 1, and then we could assign a keyboard shortcut to that. So if we were going to do that for like 100 times a day, or if we want to assign it into our MIDI remote, I'll come here. Let's and under direct offline process, we'll say favorite 1. I'm going to apply. So if I wanted to do like that process for a particular file, I could select a file, and now I'm going to have this set to auto apply. And now whenever I select an audio file here, I hit that button and it's automatically applied that process. So you don't have to set up as a macro, just drag it to your favorites, and then you're able to assign a keyboard shortcut or trigger that combination, that chain of offline processing as a plugin, and then you'll be all set with that. So if I come here, I'll just delete all the processing, and I think we did it here as well. So again, once you have that set, we can come right over here, and that would be under your favorites. So key commands to direct offline processing, and you could have 9 different favorites that you could just instantly call up. So see if that works for you. All right, Jack Bourne says, any resources for optimizing Windows 10 BIOS? So, sometimes it can be tricky because every motherboard could have different BIOS settings and different functionality. But there's a lot. I think if you go to the Cubase Nation Discord, there's lots of different tutorials for optimizing your PC. But sometimes, the BIOS could be specific for your particular motherboard. Okay, so we have Hotbeats0 asks, hi, when I select a bunch of clips to make samples, say for dividing a track by hit points and export as events, the start points are all weird, like at the end, and need to be corrected. Any way to avoid this when exporting? Okay, so let's take a look. We'll activate this project. Okay, so when I render a bunch of clips to make samples after dividing a track by hit points. All right, so I'm going to take this loop here. We'll go into our sample editor. We are going to come over here to our slices. Let's say we do this, and then we are going to create events. So now each of these events is automatically assigned. So if we come here, let's navigate so we can see the different slices that have been applied to the different events. So that seems to make sense. It says the start points are all weird, like at the end, and need to be corrected. Any way to avoid this? So, first make sure that when you're doing this, one thing that you do, and this could depend on the source material, like once you're in the sample editor, make sure that you have the intensity also set. And this will kind of do the threshold, but, make sure that you're kind of using the intensity as well, depending on the particular source material. And then you could choose like what could be, maybe something low level amplitude that, is something that has amplitude that's picked up, but that's not musically relevant. So, depending on that. But if we come over here and create events from that, so now we have each of the individual events. And if I wanted to export those, as individual audio files, I could come right over here and just choose to export selected events, and we could choose different processing if we need to, and now all of those events can be exported to a particular folder if needed. So let me know if that's helpful or if I'm misunderstanding Hotbeats0. Are you always wonderful to see Mark Rabin on with his dog Stella? So Buddy the cat from the Netherlands says hello to Stella, and everyone give a big woof to Stella, who's Mark's dog. He's sending greetings from Montucky. So I think that's an interesting juxtaposition of Montana and Kentucky for those outside the United States. We're so glad you and Stella can make it today. All right, so Fly V's question, how do I lengthen the verses and choruses? Do I need vocals? Okay, so let's say if we have a song that's kind of more like verse chorus type of Okay, so let's say if we wanted to add to lengthen a chorus or a verse. So let's say we're playing our project here. So I have some markers here, and this may be like we may have a pre-chorus coming up here. So let's say if I wanted to take, I'm going to stop my divide track list here. So I want to take everything that's in that particular marker track. I'm going to move this to the top here so we can see it a little easier. Okay, so I wanted, let's say I wanted to, so I'm going to double click between the two markers. And what I want to do at this point, let's see if we go to range, and let's go over here, and I'm just going to hit Command D to duplicate that range. Okay, so now what I could do is I'm going to mute the vocal here. So let's see if we just kind of have duplicated this particular range. So what I did in essence was just kind of repeat that section, and I'm going to, so I'm going to just take this vocal here. So we had kind of the pre-chorus, there was vocals going on, so I want to just add an instrumental section, and we'll hear the chord change but no vocal. And now we'll hear that with the vocal. So you could just simply, come over here and select, if you grab the range tool, that we could globally, if we wanted to split, so you could hit Command Shift X if you wanted to get rid of, to shorten, or if you just hit Shift X. And now we could choose to just duplicate. And you could, now at that point, if we are in, let me just, depending on which mode you're in as well. So there's also different modes here. So I'm going to hit Shift X. And then we will switch. And I'm going to switch my mode here to shuffle. And let's see if I hit D to duplicate, or let's try events. Or now that I have that selected, we could use the range tool, and if we wanted to insert silence for that particular range, so let's say now that I have the range selected, we could choose to insert silence, and we could just copy all of these tracks, hold down the Alt key and copy, and then you could elongate verses or choruses without the vocal kind of coming in. So there's a number of ways of kind of doing that within your song to kind of change the arrangement. And kind of a second part of the question was, do I need vocals? So I guess it's really up to your song if you need vocals or not. I tend to think that for commercial releases that songs with vocals tend to be more successful than instrumentals, but there's always the instrumental song that can prove me wrong. So all right, so we see from Myron Feltner Jr. says my snap to zero is off though. So, but let me know if you want to send me a screenshot of what it looks like. And this is, I think, going back to this question. All right, and I'll revert this. So if we were to kind of cut in the middle here, so let's say if I select all of my drum parts here, I'll just select all events, that, and also let us, so, and if I, again, we have snap to 0 on, I go in the middle and we zoom in, we can see that some of those cuts will be staggered, and you mentioned that you have snap to 0 off. So now when I cut with that disabled, everything will, function as expected. Make sure that your mode here, that your grid mode is set to grid, and if it's, make sure that it's not in an alternative mode there, but make sure that that is set to grid when you're doing the cuts. And let me know if they are staggered, so if it could also just be where your snap is set to. So if you are trying to cut and have it be on beat, so, and if we have the snap disabled, which is the letter J, and I think I'm cutting right on a beat, but maybe I'm a little early. So let's say I'm going to turn off my snap, and then I cut that. When I make a cut, it's not on the grid. But if we have snap turned on, the letter J, that if I'm kind of in the ballpark, this will snap to like the nearest beat. So whenever I'm kind of close, but all of the events will then be snapped based on the beat or the grid that we have set here. So see if snap makes a difference, or if you, when you make a cut, if you could tell me if the cut is at different times. But so if we have our snap here, and we have our snap set to beat, that when I make a cut, those will all be cut on a beat. But if I have that turned off, I can cut pretty much anywhere on the grid and not have it aligned to the grid. So let me know if you're cutting multiple events, if they are staggered, or if your cut itself isn't based upon the grid. All right, so we have Rob from Tarpon Springs, Florida. What are the most common uses of sidechain, and what is the desired effects? Thanks again for your help. So sometimes, sidechain can be used for a number of different things, but it's often kind of, if you have two things that are clashing, and you want the dynamics of one thing to kind of be driven by another, and this is when sidechain is used. A very typical use of this may be for like, if you're doing a project and all of a sudden you're not hearing the kick drum as well as you thought. So let's say if we have something along these lines. So we have an aggressive synthesizer and we have a kick. So in dance music, a lot of times you want that kick to have a lot of impact. And that kick is kind of driving everything. So we want other things to get out of the way of the kick. So on this synth track, I'm going to come over here. We'll open up a compressor. And this, we're going to put a heavy compression on this track. But we want the compression to be turned on and off by another track. So when I come over here, first I'm going to set my sidechain source. So we select our track, so we'll say that's the kick, and then we want to just click to the left of the plugin, and that would activate the sidechain. So as we play now, you're going to hear the kick a lot more prominently, because when the kick plays, that will trigger the compression on the synth bass, so that the attack of the kick comes through. So if we turn off sidechain, again, we can, let's say we turn this plugin off. And now that we turn the plugin on with sidechain, And you could have the release. So if you wanted to release slower or release faster. So sometimes people do that as an effect, especially in dance music, but it's very common just to kind of clean up low end so that the bass and kick drum aren't conflicting with each other. But you could do, many other different types of creative side chaining as well. All right, so we see HGem77. His question is, when I use Howling Sonic in standalone, I sometimes have more latency by playing keyboard than when I use it in a Cubase project as an instrument track. Same loading library. How is it possible? So it could be that when you're playing standalone, Cubase will do latency compensation so that when you're playing, that certain plugins and tracks may get loaded, and will be kind of basically, think of it as like a prefetch. So some stuff will get played earlier so that when it plays back in time. So when we look at our buffer settings, so when it comes to, let's say within Cubase, we select our audio interface and we go to the control panel. We can see that right now we're at a buffer of 512. Okay, but if I run Howling Sonic in standalone, that could also have independent buffer sizes. So let's say if we go to your applications and let's run Howling Sonic standalone. And when we come to your audio system setup, so let's say we want to go to the ASIO driver. So, and we go to the control panel. So here you may have different, even though it's using the same driver, but you could have different, so let's say I'll set this to my Steinberg UR24C, which is what we're using for Cubase. So now the settings for the buffer can be, set to different values than what you have in Cubase. So make sure that the buffers match up and realize that, as Cubase is playing back other tracks, that it is playing some of the other tracks that have processing on it ahead of time to compensate for any, and that's how it does the plug-in delay compensation. All right. So wonderful to see Carwin Young on the live stream. Another celebrity attendee. Okay. So we see from All About Music, how can we emulate a heavy metal guitar sound using the stock MIDI guitar? Okay, so let's say we'll come over, let's just load up an instrument track. So I guess you're going to be, let's go over here to Howling Sonic. Okay, so say we'll just load up like an 80s hard. All right, and this is probably just going to be using some plugins, but let's say if we wanted to do All right, so, and let me just check, see if we have effects built in. Here we'll do. All right, so. All right, so say we'll start with that as our guitar sound. So we'll take that. Let me just increase the volume here. Okay, so we have our guitar here. And I'm going to just load up like one of the VST amp rack as an insert. So we'll go under distortion, VST amp rack. And we'll scroll through. So let's say we want to change the amplifier more to Marshall type of amp. So any project, any audio could be processed directly through there. I'll play you a project where it's just going to be like the amp racks. Let's see if it's in my recent list. Just to give you. I'll just open it here separately. Okay, so just to kind of give you an idea, let's take.
I never promised you I'm gonna stick around.
So if we want to come over here to the VST amp rack for these two guitars. So if we want to just come over here, turn these on. So those are just kind of dry guitars and kind of in context.
And maybe start a fight. Now time is running out, but I'll be back again until the next time. It's not the end. Hit the road, gonna rock, gonna roll. I got no.
So you have great amp modelers that are part of Cubase. Steinberg's actually the first company who did like software modeling of guitar amps back in 1995 with a plugin called Red Velvet. So. Okay, so we see a clarification from Val. It says that the red triangles were not the punch points, but the bits view in supervision. So let's come over here. So let's say as we're playing this track here. So is it just this left and right here? So I think that this is just indicating. Let's come over here to the mixer and So I'll just put it on here. So let me know if that's kind of what we're seeing. So, you know, I guess it could depend on the color, but I think it's just to indicate that's the left and right channel, 1-bit through 32-bit. And that's kind of what allows you to see. All right. All right, so we see William Baker says Hi Greg, I had Spectral Layers 7, I think, when I bought Cubase 11. When I went to open it recently, it opened with V1, version 1. I had since went to Cubase 13, and Wavelab 11 doesn't a Spectral Layers version come with Cubase, so you get the Spectral Layers 1 version. So let me just... Yeah, so so I'm not sure if you're in version 1, but when you go to, let's say, your Steinberg download assistant, you know, make sure that you actually have it installed. So it doesn't necessarily show up as a plugin, but as an ARA extension. So first thing to do, just get this update. So when you go to like your Cubase 13, which I think you said you were running. All right, so make sure that like when you're here, so let's say you have your Cubase Pro 13, that you have Spectral Layers installed there. So, and it's Spectral Layers 1, which is the version that you get. So, and then it's going to be just accessible when you go to like an audio track here, and you'll see where it says no extension, that we could just come over here, and or if you wanted to select a particular track, you could have your extensions, but I tend to do it from select the track here when you see no extension. So it may not show up as a plugin, but just as an ARA extension. So now when you double click, what this will do is take that particular audio file. When we go into the sample editor, then you will see Spectral Layers in the sample editor. So if you're kind of expecting as a plugin, it has much deeper integration as an ARA2 extension. So let me know if that makes sense. See JVI, great to see you on. Just thanks for the kind words, saying thanks for the streams. Hope they're helpful. Glad you can make it today. All right. Sorry, my chat field jumped. Let me find my spot. All right, so you see a comment from Ed Rugman, just says, thanks, Gary, for your interesting thoughts and insights into the film process. Yeah, and I know depending on your budget, you know, you may have to wear many hats. So. Okay, so we see from inactive user asks, when I want to create a send with a ducking compressor on it, and send that to my main vocal track, then this uses 2 send slots, one for the delay itself and one for the compressor to duck the delay. Is there a way to duck the delay but only use 1 send slot for my vocal track? So let's give it a shot here. We'll go back to that example that we had. You might be able to use like a direct output, so if you're kind of short on sends. So let's come over, let me revert this. So another way of being able to, we'll see if we could do the side chaining via. Okay, so let's say we want to do sidechain. So another method of routing audio is using kind of direct output. So let's say, we want to do a ducking but not use a send for the ducking. So let's see if we could utilize the direct outputs. So I'm going to have my compressor here. All right. And we want to have the kick track feed it. So we're going to activate this. We're going to set our kick track as a sidechain input. But instead of this using the send for the sidechain input, okay, so let's see if we could access it with direct routing. All right, we'll try from the full mixer. Yeah, it doesn't look like it's going to be utilized from the direct routing. But I think you're gonna, if you're doing side chaining, you're gonna have to use 2 different sends. But let me know if you're just short on sends, because you might be able to send this track to a group channel. So let's say now we're sending it to the group channel, and so this is basically, this signal is going into the group channel. And now if we go to our sends on the group channel, we could send the side chain from the group. So we still have 8 effect sends on right here. So we have our 8 effect sends on this track. Our group we could use for additional side chains as well. So this way we could do all side chaining from a group if you need 8 side chains and 8 effect sends. So use the track for effect sends, and the group, which is basically only this track is being mimicked, can give you an additional 8 effect sends with that. So let me know if that's helpful or makes any sense. All right, Cassandra Husky says, so much change and was moved around from Cubase 12 to 13 Pro. Can you guys please update your help videos and the templates? So, yeah, I mean, let me know like which particular, I mean, some things are always going to change, but if, but most of, there's hundreds of hours of tutorials that are all done in Cubase 13 as well. But if there's anything in particular that you're finding that you can't find from 12 to 13, need some like where is this in the new version? Just feel free to let us know, Cassandra, and we'd be happy to show you where it's at. All right, so we see Jay from Secret Studios says, hi Greg, I'm looking to finally build an orchestral template, but because they are all so bespoke, do you have one made of Iconica Basic that I could use as an example to add my VSTs to? So I think that Jazz Dude has a Iconica sketch template, which you'll probably share a link to in the Cubase Nation Discord. If not, if you want to email me and tell me like which order of instruments, I could do kind of the standard orchestral order if you want, but I'd be happy to kind of create one and send it to you. But you could email me, and this is also for anyone else, at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay, so Nuri asks how to add mono to stereo on a channel next to the record and monitor. All right, so let's see if we could do that. So if we come over here, we go to our track control settings. We could also just kind of click here. All right, so now we can see kind of the order. So we have name, record enable, monitor, and edit channel settings. So let's see if we can move up. All right. So let me see if we ungroup these. All right, I'll reset. So let's say I want to our channel configuration. I'm going to ungroup this. Then I'm going to select the channel configuration and choose to move up. And you wanted it just to the left of to the record and monitor. So now when we hit apply, we could see the record, monitor, and our channel configuration. So at this point, so reset. So to do that again, we'll go select, and you could right click to go to your track control settings. And if you have an audio track selected, that will be here. We're going to select the edit channel settings and channel configurations. By default will be grouped. We'll choose to ungroup those. Let's go to your channel configuration, click move up, and then apply, hit OK, and then you could change the order as they appear, like so. So let me know if that's helpful, and I'll reset everything to default for my purposes. All right, so we see Real Raven 2000 says, thanks, Greg. I did know about the search. That's the way I would find duplicates, but you have to have a suspicion, wondering if a find duplicate could be made with a logical editor, maybe. So it's not necessarily a duplicate. I mean, you could say, you could say select tracks named. So let's say if we go to the project logical editor, all right, so let's say we have some tracks here named Tom in this project. So if we go to the project logical editor, you could say, select container type is equal to track, and name contains Tom. So, but I'm not sure if it's going to go through. And so if you have kind of an idea, so this might be able to isolate particular tracks, but you have to kind of know what the what the name is. So, but I'll pass that along as a suggestion. All right, wonderful to see Gerald Ely from Martinez, California. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we see Real Raven 2000 says the best thing would be a feature that warns you when you use a name that's already taken, force unique names. I definitely tried to find things like mix or group for non-audio tracks. So let's say if we come here, let's do a new project. I mean, Cubase will do a lot to kind of, mimic. So let's say we want to add a number of audio tracks, and we'll call these Vox, that the numbers will be incremented. But, could be people would want to have tracks with the same name. So, and now if we record, I think Cubase will automatically increment the names of the files, so that as we're working with that, so it'll make unique names on the files itself. So it does a lot of stuff to kind of mitigate the process. But, if you're, with track names, it could probably, I think it makes sense to have tracks with the same name within the project, but I understand how that could wreak havoc on a controller. But you could also reach out to Nectar and see if they have any solutions as well. All right, so you see Frank Jenko asks, I'm considering switching to Cubase from another DAW because of stability reasons. I heard that Cubase 12 wasn't very stable either. How about 13? So I think, Cubase 12 was very stable. It's obviously used in many award-winning projects. It's won lots of Oscars and Grammys over the year. I think Cubase 13 initially had some problems with some display, some NVIDIA display drivers, on the initial release, but I think it's been very stable. So, and we hope to have you in the Steinberg Cubase family. If you're going to buy, wait a week. All right. Benny asks, hi Greg, when I go to Activation Manager, the box that allows a browser to open, it does not appear. Any solution to that? So let's come over here to Activation Manager. All right, so the first thing that I would check out is just to make sure, let's get this loaded up. All right, make sure that first that you are, so I'm not sure if it's this box that allows you, that's not visible, but, see if you're signed in here. And then, I would, if you don't see this, maybe sign out and re-sign in with your credentials. So, but let me know if this is the box that's not visible. So the box that allows the browser to open it. So, but let's say if you just go to My Steinberg, you do that. But see if you just come here, so you could kind of have the automatic license management, but try maybe signing out and signing back in, and that, I think, so if we sign out, that you could do that independently of the browser window. I don't want to do it in the middle of the live stream in case I accidentally deactivate a license or something. All right, wonderful to see Matt Elston on. Thanks for joining us. Gerald Ely gives a big woof to Stella, Mark Raven's dog. Secret Studios and Real Raven 2000 and JVI are also passing along woofs. All right, so we have Space Crawler just saying good day, musician enthusiasts all around the world. Thanks for joining us today. All right, so we see from Real Raven 2000 says, Greg, question on chord coloring mode. It doesn't really seem to reflect my chord track for a number of Cubase versions. It's often not green, but blue, even with simple chords such as B flat major 7. B flat's green, okay, but why is E flat green and F blue? Okay, so let's take a look. Let's add a chord track. Okay, so I'm going to just make a MIDI track here. And let's populate the MIDI track. Okay, so I will, let's take a look at the chord. So we have our chord track that we see at the top here, and I'll just move some of these notes, and I want to colorize it based upon just event colors. I'll just move this up. Okay, so let's say we are in okay, so let's say we are in B flat major. Okay. And let me go ahead and just move some of the notes around here. Okay, so I want to take let me just change my okay, so I want to move this A, let's say to B natural. Okay. And I think that this could also be applied when we get to the scale assistant, that if we use the chord. So make sure, like in the scale assistant, I think this came in 12 or 11. So you could use the chord track or utilize the editor scale. So let's say if we're in the editor scale, at this point when we're in our chord suggestion, I can say, okay, let's go to B flat major, so we can do that. But if we're doing it with the chord track, now I use the chord track, and I have this set to scales and chords, so we could have it follow the basis of the chord track or follow the basis of the scale that is set in the editor. So once we do this and we come over to the setup, we can see that this note is not in the key. We can see that notes, that are within the chord and scale. But let's say if I come here and I have a note. So let's say we have our note here. We'll enlarge this part, and we just copy these particular notes. All right, so right now we see our scale as being in C major, but let's say our chord is set to D major. So now at this point, I switch my G to an F sharp that, we could still have like the blue notes, which would be notes that are within the particular chord, but not within the scale as well. So make sure when you go to the scale assistant that when you come over here that you could actually see whether you're using the editor scale or chord track, and then you will get slightly different settings. So you could have notes that are within a chord, but the chords are not within the scale. Now those could be blue. You could have them within the scale. If it's totally out, like our B natural in B flat major, you could do that. And if it's falling within the chord and scale, it's green. So, but it could be, since you mentioned a couple versions ago, that it's using the editor scale that's not defined versus a chord track scale. So you may have to, if you have the editor scale, which I think is default, you may just have to come over and within the scale assistant set up your key as needed right there. So give that a try. Let me know if that makes sense. All right. All right, so we see a question from Achilles. Hello, is it possible to link two tracks to enable recording and then link one of those tracks with another track to control volume at the same time? I want to avoid groups. So yeah, so let's say we'll come over here. Let's say we have Vox 4 and 5. I'll get to my mix console. We're going to have these channels linked. Let me just change the output setting here. Okay. So I'm going to select these two tracks and we're going to link them. All right, so let's take a look. All right, let me just read it. So you're going to enable for recording and then link one of those tracks with another track. So sometimes, having, all right, so let's see if we can do it. So let's edit the link. I'm going to unlink these. So let's say we want to just link these for record enable monitor. Okay. So now as we do this, if I record enable 1 and monitor 1, those will be linked in that regard. Now let's see if we could add a VCA fader to this channel. It might not allow us to do it since it's in the link. So another way of approaching this, could be, so say we will so the link would be, we could, if we only want one to be, so once we link these, then that would link both of them for VCA. But let's see if we assign this track, add the VCA to the selected track. And then let's see if, yeah, so now the VCA would automatically control that track, and we could put these two tracks into, if you wanted to, you could put them into a folder. So let's say we just say move selected track to new folder. So then I could, on the folder itself, do the record, enable, and monitor. And then if I wanted to control the volume of another track, I could assign that to VCA fader. So these can be, if let's say we get rid of our link. So my record enable, let me just turn all these off here up. So as we're working with this, I could click on the folder for record enable and then move these. I'll just start fresh here, sorry. So, but also if you could let me know why you don't want a group, but let's come here, let's add 2 audio tracks, put these into a folder. So now I could record enable the folder and have separate volume controls. So if you just want it for the link and monitoring, let me know if that would be an approach. You could assign it to VCA fader, but that would be linking the channel, and then that would link both of the channels for within the VCA. So you could try putting it into a folder and use that to link the record enable and still have independent volume controls. Or if you need a different fader to control the volume of one track, if you could let me know, that would be helpful. All right, reading through comments. All right, so we see Jay from Secret Studios. Is there a way to change all VST instrument inputs, even nested in folders, to be changed to a specific MIDI controller? Okay, so let's say we'll add a couple of instrument tracks and a couple of MIDI tracks. So let's put these into a folder. And I'll close that folder, so we'll call it an instrument. And let's add a folder of a couple MIDI tracks. All right, and I'll just add another exposed instrument track. Let's say a retro log. Okay, so let's take a look and see if we could. So let's say I want to set it to my Nectar controller. So currently we look at the MIDI inputs. They're all going to be set to all MIDI inputs for my instrument, for my MIDI, and for my expose. So I'll go ahead and close the folders. I won't have that selected. Let's try going to the project logical editor and go to our setup. So let's say we want to start from scratch. So let's say we want to have our media type is equal to MIDI, and we're going to choose transform. Let's go to, see if it's under track operation and connect input. And I want it to all go to my Panorama P4 MIDI in as opposed to all MIDI inputs. So now when I come over here, let's see if that switched them. So we can see, yeah, Panorama P4 MIDI in, so the tracks that were in the folders. Let's come over here to the MIDI tracks, Panorama, and retro logs at the Panorama. So once again, we'll just, and we don't have to have anything selected. We're going to say we want media type is equal to MIDI, and track operation, we can say connect input. I will switch these all back. Let's say I'll switch it to chord pads and hit apply. And now all of the MIDI inputs will be set here to chord pads, whether in a folder or outside of a folder. So let's say I'll switch them all back to all MIDI inputs. So give that a try, Jay. Let me know if that makes sense and accomplishes what you want. Okay. Okay, just reading through comments. So we have a question. Can I open direct offline processing window with a macro? Is that possible? So yeah, the key command for that is just F7, opens up the direct offline processing. So function key F7. You could assign that to any key command as well. So if we come over here to edit, to key commands, and let's say we go, if we click on this little keyboard icon and I hit F7, we could see that that would automatically open up the direct offline processing, and you could change the key command if you want. But F7 is the default key command, so you don't have to create a macro to do that. All right, sorry, my chat field jumped on me. Let me find my spot. Okay. Okay, reading through comments here. Okay, so you see from from Real Raven 2000. When I open up chord setup, I see 4 colors: green, blue, orange, and yellow without any labels, description. Okay, so let me just create some chord parts and see if I could recreate this. Okay. All right, so let me just, it says when I open chord setup, I see 4 colors. So I assume that's going to be in the colors here. So let me know if these are the chord track colors that you're seeing, but mine are labeled. Here's non-scale, chord and scale. And let's say if we use the chord track as our editor, we could okay, so we see inactive user. We see some discussion. I think this is with using one send for doing side chaining. Yeah, so by default, when you do, you could manually, do side chaining. So let's say if we were doing kind of a side chain scenario. So let's say I want to have a compressor in here. So let's say I have a compressor in this channel. And let's say we have it activated for sidechain, but I haven't done the sidechain setup and I want it to come right over here. If we go to the sends, we could manually add it in just like that. So it's not automatically done. So you don't have to automatically do the sidechain routing, but it could reflect it. But, and again, if you wanted to not, to have, if you needed more sends for the side chaining, again, send that track to a group, and then you could use the group as the basis for side chains, and our 8 sends on the track for effects. All right, so seeing just questions on Real Raven, I think maybe the chord versus editor scale. And maybe when you get to that point, maybe that will do the trick. All right, wonderful to see Pertti Komenen checking in from Finland. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you're well. See, Mark Rabin's going to drop off to get his car serviced. Yeah, I had yesterday off, so I went and got my car cleaned and ran a bunch of errands. So. Okay, reading through comments. All right. All right, Christopher Samuels asks, is there a way to change the tonic chord on chord pads and then all the relevant chords change automatically? Everything seems to be in minor keys by default, but can I easily alter the scale to major? So it's going to be so when we're in the chord pads, let me just make sure. Okay, so let's say if we're in the chord pads, so, this could be our default. So let's say if we just want to clear this, I will select all my pads and let's go ahead and we'll just delete. So I'm going to start off here with, so I'm going to build just a quick C major. We'll just double click here. We'll say D minor, E minor, F, G will do. All right, so once we have kind of, let's say we, so say B diminished here, we'll do A minor. All right, so let's say we wanted a D major, so we could do like a 5 of 5. We wanted an F7. Let's say a G7. And let's do a C7 chord. So let's say we have this laid out for us, and this is our chords that we're working with. So I will open up just a quick Hallian Sonic so we can listen to it. All right, so now so if we just kind of start off, we can just have, like, let's say we made our chords for that. So while the default may be like C minor, we could do this, but at this point we could just say, and I'll make this a C major 7 here. So we can kind of have a major scale. So, and if we want to save this as a preset, all we'd have to do is, again, come over here and we'll call this major scale. So if we want it again to just, say preset. So the chords that you have here are, can be, maybe a little more creative than what you would normally expect for like just kind of a plain song. But if you had to do, quick chord progressions, you could just use something like this. And one of the beauties of this is, as we're triggering the chords, if we wanted to now modulate, we don't have to change all the chords. We could set the root key, so we could have all of your major and minors. So if you wanted to start with that as the basis for your default chords, you could do that quite easily as well. So let's say we want to say preset. I'll just call this major chord, and you could make it the default preset if you wanted to within your chord pads. So you could have it be whatever you want to be, but you could now. So that would be a good way to work with. All right, so we see from Real Raven just says, I know all that, Greg. The problem is I get sent projects that have names already set, and other people maybe aren't as diligent with file management and project naming. So, all right, so you see from Benny, I just see a reference to Greg. This is the message that comes up. I have changed computers. Let me see if I could scroll back and find, maybe it's a reference to another one, or maybe it's a picture that didn't come through. So just scrolled back a bit, Benny, but maybe if you could refresh my memory on what it was, or if there's maybe part of a message that didn't come through. Okay, just finding my spot, reading through comments. Okay, so you see Benny sent an email. Let me see if the emails come in. Let me see if I could find it quickly. Look at it on my phone. Bear with me just for a moment. Okay, so I think this may be with the activation manager. Okay, so in Benny's message is just saying authorize Steinberg Activation Manager. It says authorize the Steinberg Activation Manager. You need your browser to open Steinberg Activation Manager. So, see if you have, generally when I do that, the browser is automatically opening. So maybe, Benny, if you could tell us which browser that you're using. But mine just kind of is always kind of opened up the browser. All right, so JVI says, Greg, I was not here when the stream started, but I was wondering if you managed to get a Pro Drums bundle for showcasing for today. So I didn't. I gave it a try, but I haven't heard back on any licenses. And sometimes I have access for NFRs, and it wasn't one of the options that was available. So hopefully Friday. But it was kind of reading up, and it seems kind of like a multi-track drum recordings that could be used for songs, which is something that Steinberg used to do maybe 20 years ago-ish, maybe longer, which is called 25 years, like VST drum session. So I hope I could get a license because I want to check it out myself. All right, so we see Jay from Secret Studio says, Cubase, any way to set up a keyboard MIDI controller type group? For example, if I want a group of keyboard controllers to trigger instruments but not mixer controllers, like an all except filter. So when you do your setup, so let's say you go to your studio menu to studio setup, one of the things that you could do is when you will come over to your MIDI port setup. So, and once you do this, you could choose which controllers will actually be included in all MIDI inputs. So if you want controllers that, sometimes, and it's a question we've gotten a lot on the live stream, where I'm hitting the play button on my controller and it's playing a MIDI note. And that's because when you go to when you hit the play button on a controller, that's actually just transmitting a MIDI note message. So that MIDI note message could be interpreted to play an instrument sound, or it could be used to play a MIDI note. So to mitigate that, to kind of fix that, is what you could do is go again to your studio menu, to studio setup, go to your MIDI port setup, and the ones that you're using for controllers, you'll see this in all MIDI inputs. So what you could do here is just choose for your controllers not to be functioning in all MIDI inputs. So if you have something that's set up for a Mackie control or another protocol, you could just simply come right here and say, okay, when I have a MIDI track set to in all MIDI inputs, this isn't going to be the in all MIDI inputs isn't accepting MIDI data from this particular MIDI controller. So give that a try, Jay, and I think it'll get you where you want. Okay, so we see Jay from Secret Studios says Cubase and a VST instrument right panel. What are the page numbers for underneath the VSTi name? Okay, so let's say I'll add an instrument of, let's say, Retrolog. So Retrolog has lots of parameters available within Retrolog, so more than 8. So when you go to our VSTi instrument, and let's expand this. All right, and all right, so hang on just 1 second. So, all right, so we see that we could have up to 8 quick controls that are set up. Now we also see page 1. So when I come over here to Retrolog, we could have page 1, page 2, page 3. So what this is going to allow us to do is we could have 8 parameters. So once I'll go to my MIDI remote here, and I'll set this up for my focus quick controls. So I move on my Retrolog track. We could control, these particular parameters. So let's say, so my quick controls will control these parameters, but I may want to control other parameters. So let's say we open up the instrument, I move quick control 1, it's controlling my resonance, we can control our key follow. But when we go to a particular instrument, and if we open this up, you'll see this little drop down menu. You could go to what's called a remote control editor. So for this particular instrument, I may want to have these 8 controls banked together. And I could have a secondary bank of controls, a third bank. So this way, all of the parameters for the instrument, we could organize and change the order. So when we're in page 1, we're controlling these parameters. And if I go to page 2, we're now controlling the second layer of 8 parameters. Page 3 is now these parameters. Page 4, these parameters. So while you may have 8 physical controllers, you can have those 8 physical controllers just immediately bank to different collections of controls for the instrument that you could assign and map for yourself. So while you have quick controls, and then within the MIDI remote, you could actually just choose to have a button that switches between banks. So while you have 8 knobs, you could just bank between different banks of 8 controls, where each of those controls in each bank is independent. So you can control a lot of parameters using, fewer knobs. So that's what the banks allow you to do, is to access additional banks of controllable parameters for a plugin or instrument. All right. So we see Real Raven's just saying in his Cubase, his 4 colors have no labels. All right. All right, we see Mark Rabin has to check out. All right, so we see Real Raven 2000 says, okay, I think that's it, the scale assistant. Switch from editor scale to use chord track, fixed it. Editor scale seems to be complete fantasy, not related to the chord track. Yeah, so they're independent of each other, so that you could edit within, you could do MIDI editing. The intention is that you could do MIDI editing within the scale if you didn't have a chord track present in the project. So they can function independently, but you could just specifically choose which one you want to use as the basis. So I'm glad that seemed to help with your issue. All right, so we have Jay from Secret Studios asks, is it possible to change the MIDI controller inputs of disabled tracks? Let's give it a shot. So I'm not sure if there's a point, because the disabled track isn't going to play anyway. So it looks like the routing is shut off. So let's see if we enable. So we look at the routing here, we disable the track. Yeah, so I'm not sure, it's like almost like if you turn off the light, let's say if you have a light, so I'll give it a shot, but it's disabled when the track is disabled, so it's not going to accept any MIDI input. So I'm not sure if you need to change a disabled track. I guess it could be like walking into a room and you have a light switch that turns a lamp on from an outlet, and then turning the lamp off itself. So, but let me know if there's a specific reason that you need to change the MIDI controller input of a disabled track, since it's not actually accepting any MIDI inputs. All right, we have a question from 808 King. Hi, Greg. Can you please show me again how to put 2 vocal samples on a track and sync and put in key without the sampler track? Okay, so let's start brand new project. All right, so if you have a vocal track that's not really, I won't do a loop that has metadata, but I'll just take like an acapella vocal. Here, I'll just import. Sorry, let me just. Okay, so let's say if we want to.
Do you recall the day we first met? That was a long, long time ago.
Okay, so if we, want to kind of figure out, and one of the great things you could do kind of in Cubase is just kind of come over here to like the tap tempo. And so let's say, while it's playing.
Do you recall the day we first met? That was a long, long time ago. It was 7th grade in the school parking.
So you can now come over here and get kind of a rough idea of what the tap tempo was. And if you wanted to, so at that point we could just say, okay, it's, maybe it was recorded at 100 beats a minute, whatever. But you could also now, let's say if we go into our Very Audio editor, let's say, okay, you think the song, like I think this was originally an A major, then you could just come over here and quantize pitches, and all of the pitches for the audio will now be quantized to a particular key. So, and this is where the editor scale is also good, so you could just kind of take a look at it from there as well. So it's a couple things you could do, like tap tempo. You could manually set tempo using like the warp grid, but it's also, just coming over to within the Very Audio editor and using the scale assistant. All right, so Val says, thanks, Greg, for doing these streams. And he has to take off and he's going to join us on Friday for the next live stream. Thanks for joining us all the way from Vienna. I realize it's late there. It's probably about 9:30 currently. All right, so we see from Cycling is Awesome as a question. It says, I have a project with strong interruptions. What can I do? Not many tracks and not too many plugins. So if it's kind of like stuttering along and kind of like, feels like the engine can't go up the hill, first thing I would do is come over here to the studio setup, select your audio interface, and raise the buffer. So, max the buffer out, and the higher the buffer, it could be the higher latency that you're working with, but it could also indicate that it's easier for the computer to process all of the audio. So if you don't have many tracks, try raising the buffer would be the first thing I would do. So if you haven't tried that, I would do that first, and if you have, let us know and we could go from there. All right. All right, so we see Dennis 440 Hertz asks, hi Greg, is there a way to select 4 bars rather than 16 beats in the Media Bay attribute filter? Thanks for all you do. All right, so let's take a look. I think it might be tied to beats because it doesn't necessarily assume that all of your songs are going to be in 4/4 time. So it could be in 3/4, it could be in 2/4, and then the number of bars could change depending, as opposed to the number of beats and how they're divided. But let's take a look. All right, I just... All right, so let's come over here to the... I think it's probably going to be under musical. All right, so there is a bars and beats. So let me just create a quick part and render it so we could apply that. Okay, so let's call this August 20th. All right, so I'm going to export this to my desktop. All right, so let's find that file quickly, see if it. Okay, so let's say we have our audio file here. So let's, go to Media Bay. All right. All right, so just find this file one more time, sorry. Okay, so now we'll come over to the attribute inspector. come over to musical. All right, so say we call this 4 bars. So again, I think it's going to do that just because, you know, all loops are going to be kind of beat based and you could have different time signatures. So I think, let's see if we do, if I put in 2 different values. Yeah, so let's say I want to do 16 beats, but 4/4 meter. So it's, you know, so it's going to be, you know, that it's going to, I think, how it works with different time signatures. So it took me a while to get there. Okay, so we have a question from inactive users. It says, thanks, Greg. When I use a send, for example, on parallel compression, then I have a slider on the DX channel itself and with a compressor on it and a slider below my track where the send is routed to. Which one should I use? If I use the parallel compressor, parallel compression, should it be applied on more than one track, but every time different amounts? So you see, then I have a slider in the DX channel itself with a compressor on it. So I'm not sure what the DX channel. Let me just read through it again. On it, and a slider below my track where the send is routed to. All right. So another method that you could use if you want to do like parallel compression. So let's say. And if you don't want to use any sliders, and this is a question that was kind of mailed in that we could go on to, like some of the advantages of direct routing versus using groups. So let's take a look at it. And if you're fearful of using different groups for eating up sends, so now we will come over, let's pop over to this project. So I'm going to take all of my drums in this project. And I want to do parallel compression on the drums, but I don't want to use any sends whatsoever. So revert this. So I'm going to come right here and I'm going to add 2 group channels. So, you know, we'll make them stereo groups. So I'm not doing any of the routing to them. So we'll just say, okay, let's come over here. We'll call this our crush group. So one of the things that we can do is now is we'll come over, let's go to, so we could envision it a little better, our mixer. So I want to enable direct routing. So I'm going to select all of my drum tracks. And instead of it going to my stereo out, I'm going to send it to group 1. And that could be like your drum group. And I also want to send these, and I'm going to enable Q link. So they're all sent to Q1. I'm going to send it to my drum crush group. Now we want to, you may see like a little settings in the upper right hand wheel, in the upper right hand corner, a little settings cog wheel. Set that for direct routing summing mode on. So now as we do this, like if you're doing parallel processing, so I'm going to come over here. So without using any sends, it's going to our drum bus. And it's also going to, let's say, so we'll just call this drums. So let's say on this track is where I want to do my heavy duty compression on this bus. So, and when we do this, we haven't used any sends whatsoever, but just using direct outs. So for parallel processing, direct outs won't utilize any of your sends. So when we just come over here, you can just go to your direct routing, and you could automate these changes. So if I want to automate all of my drums, so I'll just come over here, let's automate everything. So let's say coming into the verse, I don't want it to go to the crush group. Now let's say as we come in now, so if I wanted to do the parallel compression just in the chorus, now I want it in now. So, and as we rewind, we can just simply have all of the automation for our routing. So you could do lots of parallel stuff without using any effect sends. So that's, if you're concerned about effect sends, then, consider using direct routing. And those are some of the advantages of using direct routing as opposed to different ones. But you don't necessarily, and with parallel compression, it's often not different amounts for each one. So. All right, so we see from Irfan Yasin, it says, I connected to my friend on VST Connect. I couldn't hear the tracks in my friend's Cubase, but could hear his talk back. So it could be, because when you're setting up kind of a VST Connect session in the control room, so one of the things you could do is, like, once we're setting up a VST, we can say create a VST Connect session like this. So he's the engineer. If you're not hearing the tracks, they probably have to go into the control room and make sure that they're sending the tracks. So once we do this, you'll have as an insert, this is going to load up like the VST Connect plugin. So you want to make sure that the VST Connect plugin is being utilized in the control room. Because if the tracks aren't being sent to like the headphone mix for the VST Connect, the performer's not going to hear the tracks. So the tracks themselves have to be set to be routed, through the Q mix. So if we want it to, let's just see if we have their Qs. Yeah. So when you go to our Q sends, you would need to set up the Q mix for the tracks for the VST Connect. So that's probably why you didn't hear it, but you could hear him talking. All right, so we see from Benny, it just says, Greg, I use Google Chrome, and this with his the activation manager. So I'll do some reading up on it and see if I can find anything. And I have your email, Benny, so I'll respond via email. You could always try to uninstall and reinstall. So, and see if that will allow you to be triggered, but Google Chrome should work. All right, so we see Jay from Secret Studio says, thank you, Greg. I completely misunderstood that all MIDI inputs checkbox is to activate or deactivate a MIDI tool or entire all equipment sets. I'm a dunce. So you're not a dunce. Everyone's learning stuff. So we all learn new things all the time. So you'll be smarter next time. So that's a great thing to be. All right, so we have a question from Cam Creative. Is it possible to render each output of one contact or Hallian instrument as separate audio channels? So yeah, it's going to basically follow the outputs of, you'll need to do the outputs into like separate outputs into the mixer. So we'll do a new project here. So I'll open up a multi-timbral instance of Hallian 7, or I'll just do Hallian Sonic, just make it a little faster. Okay, so I'll do some 21st century composition. All right. All right, so so I'm gonna just add a number of MIDI tracks here. We'll add a couple. All right, so I'm gonna copy this. Okay, I'll load up some more instruments here just so we can have. Okay, so right now when we do this, they're all, so we'll just say it's kind of nonsensical musically, but we go to our mix console. Everything now is currently going out of one output. So we see, when we look at this, everything is like one going out of one stereo out. We see our MIDI tracks, but so what I want to do now is to, within the instrument, every instrument will do this slightly different ways. If you go to the mix, we'll say, okay, this is going to go out of our main output. This one's going to go out of output 2, output 3, output 4. So when we look at this, we open up our main instrument. We can see our outputs, and as we play, we'll see these will all have outputs going in different times. So we'll see our third track pop up. All right. So now that these are split into different audio paths, what we could do is I'm going to take, we could take these particular instruments, and if we wanted to just select them, and okay, let's do a render in place. And we choose channel settings. We now hit render. And let me see, I may have chosen like a big dummy to mix down all the files. So I'm going to choose not to mix down. So now we're going to render each one of these is going to be rendered individually. So you could just do it individually like that. So once you have it set up, you can now at that point just render, but it's all going to be kind of contingent on the MIDI output routing or the audio output routing there. And then once you have that done, then it's going to automatically render each track separately. All right, so we see Mark Rabin and Stella have made it back from their errands. Mark Rabin says, hey, if you're watching this and you like it, hit the like button. So seems like Michael Teams, I think he might be on his vacation. So we're at to suffer without ice cream without Michael Teams. All right, we have a question from Big Rat Studios. Please, I would like to learn how to create buses and group tracks in Cubase. Okay, so a couple different approaches. So if we wanted to just make our group tracks, so let's say, again, I want to take like all of my drums or all of my vocals. So if we have a group track here, we could right click and choose to add a group channel. So we could choose for this group to be mono, stereo, often stereo. And if we wanted to route these particular tracks, I'll move this to the bottom here. If we want to route all of these tracks, which are currently routed to the stereo out, so I'm going to hit the arrow key. We see that these are all routed to the stereo out as I use the up and down arrow keys. So what I want to do is to select all of these tracks, and I'm going to route it to the group by holding down Alt or Option plus the Shift key and change one of the routings. So we do that. Now all of the tracks, let me just do it one more time, sorry. So now all of those tracks are routed to group one. Now a faster way of doing this is just to come over, and I want to select all of these tracks, right click, and we could add a group channel to selected channels. So now when I come over here, we could just say, let's make a drum group. And now all of those tracks will automatically be routed to the drum group for you. So I think fastest way is just to right click and add groups to selected channels. So give that a try, and that's how you can do very fast and effective routing. All right. Reading through comments and questions here. Okay. Okay, so we see from Cycling is Awesome, says, I will try that. Thank you. So you're welcome. Hope that does the trick. Okay, so you see Mark Raven has had a loose USB-C connection and seems to have it figured out. So, but he has to be very conscious of it. Okay, so you see Dennis for 40 Hertz just says, thanks, Greg. I appreciate the help with the media bay. So you're welcome. All right, wonderful to see Sable Winters on from Bay Area, California. Glad you can make it today. All right, so we see Jay from Secret Studios says, I'm pretty new to track presets as well. Is there a way to save folder tracks with MIDI and or instrument tracks within them? So it's not necessarily that you could save folder tracks, but if we have, let's come over here. All right, so I'll just load up a couple instruments here. Okay, so we have these instruments. So let's say if I want to save these as a track preset, so they are currently not within a folder. Let me put them into a folder. So I'm going to move the selected tracks to a new folder. So there's a couple approaches that we could take. So I'm going to save this as August 20th, 2024. Okay, so we have the project saved. So if I wanted to come over here, let's save. I could right click and save a track preset. So we'll call it JSynth. We'll call it secret synth. Okay, so if we do a new project, and I wanted to load those instruments, so it's not necessarily going to load the folder from a track preset because it's independent of the folder. I could come over to user presets, to track presets, to multi, and we'll say secret synth, and I could just drag that over or double click, and that will load up all of the instruments. If I wanted them to be loaded within a folder, so let's undo that. I could also just double click here, and that would load up the instruments. If I come to import tracks from project, I'll navigate, let's say, to my Hangouts folder. All right, so now I could do that, and now I could import the folder with the instruments. I could choose to ignore parts, but if I absolutely needed to include the folder, I could just simply import the selected tracks and select the folder, and that would do all of the tracks, and then all of the instruments with their presets would automatically be loaded for us. So two different approaches. Save it as a multi-track preset. So just save as a user preset. And then, I think user presets are like really important. So, if you have a studio drum kit, this is my acoustic grand piano in my studio that I have mic'd up. You could just, very easily load up those different presets fast and have access. Or, I know that when this singer comes over, or this guitarist, that I could use the same preset that they used last time as a starting off point. All right, so we see from Cam Creative says, oh my God, thank you so much. You're a lifesaver. Bless you. Says the best Cubase channel ever. So glad we're able to help. Okay, inactive user asks, do I use the return fader versus send level for reverb? What is a common way to do this? Because I don't want to use my reverb as an insert. I think that's a great methodology, not to use your reverb as an instrument. Let me see if I still have a project open where I did. Okay. Okay, so let's say we want to put reverb on something. Okay.
Do you recall?
So we have
the
our
day
vocal.
we first met? That was a long, long time ago.
So I'm going to right click, and we're going to, and just like we added a group channel to kind of do all the routing, I'm going to add an effects channel to this. So let's add a revelation reverb. So now when we come over here, we look at our mix console, we will see that we're going to have our
Do you
reverb.
recall the day we first met?
Now, we may have to go to the track and come over here, and we'll just go to our sends. And on this, we're going to just say,
That was a long, long time ago.
so what the send is going to do is to
Seventh grade in the school parking
blend
lot,
more
waiting
of the
on our
effect
yellow coach to ferry
to
us
our
home.
source signal. So if this is all the way over to the right, we hear more reverb.
Heart shone through parking lot, waiting on our yellow coach to ferry us home.
So we hear this is dry. We're not sending it to the reverb. As we move this over to the right, we send more of it to the reverb.
Yellow coach to ferry us home. You looked my way and your heart.
Now
shone
this
through.
works in conjunction with our return. So if our return is very low,
My breath while you
and I
called
move this
me
all the way
to.
up, we may not hear as much reverb.
Well, even now I'm so in love with you, just like a long, long time ago.
So if I have a lot of reverb here and my send, so this is a kind of a balance between
I
these.
remember the day that we went. Seems like a long, long time ago.
So if this,
And
if our
first
return
kiss,
level
there was
isn't
no regret. Right after
all the way up, we could
that
add a lot of
good
reverb, but we may not
show.
hear the reverb. So a lot of times people will leave the
Your
reverb
daddy
returns
and called my mom,
at
said
0
you were too
and then
damn
adjust
good
the
for
balance
any
here.
boy that
Now, if you're doing a big mix and then at the end you're like, oh, it's just a little too reverby. It's a little too wet sounding. At that point, you could now just bring the overall reverb on all the channels down by adjusting the return. But for the most part, I would start off leaving the effects return at 0, and then using the send to do the balance between,
the soured words are now dead and done.
So again, if we have it's sending to the reverb, but the reverb itself is very soft, we may not get the effect that we're looking for.
Now our 2 grown daughters are married with kids.
So let me know if that makes sense for you, an active user. All right. So we see from Big Rat Studios, says thanks a lot. It says, please can you like me more on parallel compression? Thanks for your time and all you do. All right, so when we want to do like parallel compression, the concept is maybe you want something that has like dynamics that are controlled and kind of can give it a beefy sound, but you still want like all the transients to be present. So often when doing kind of parallel compression, so let's do just, I'll go back to our drum example because it's often used in this regard. All right, so I'm going to create, and there's different ways of doing this. So some people, a lot of plugins, so there's a couple of different approaches. The traditional approach, if you were to mimic kind of analog hardware, is that you would send a signal to 2 different groups. One group is going to be compressed heavily, and the other group isn't. So you get kind of the attacks from the transients from the uncompressed track, and then you kind of get the meat from the compressed track and blend it together. So I'm going to add a group channel. So we'll call this drums, and people often use this as kind of a flavor. People often call it New York compression. I believe it actually started with in Motown. My friend Bob Dennis, who passed away, who was the mastering engineer at Motown, he may have been the first person to actually do this. And if you listen to Motown stuff, why the bass is always so well heard, it's because Bob did this trick. So I'm going to add another group channel, and we'll call this like drums crushed. Okay, so right now we have none of the tracks routed to our drum groups. So I'm going to come over here. We could do this via, a lot of people use sends. We showed it earlier using direct outputs. This time I'll show it using send. So I'm going to select all of my drum tracks. And then we'll go to our sends. And I want to come over here. Let's hold down. I have my Q link enabled, and all these tracks are selected. So I want to send it to my drum group. And we'll send it at 0 dB. And I want to now send it to my drums crush group, and we'll turn all of those on. So at this point, all of our drums are being routed to 2 groups. Okay, on one of the groups, we're going to apply like insert processing. Cubase has the channel processing, so I'm just going to apply the dynamics here, and we'll do like just a heavy compression. So as we play, we listen to our drums. So this will be like our dry drums. And we listen to these drums. And we can hear how those drums, so these drums aren't heavily compressed. So you hear kind of the attacks go through. And on this, we could get that beef of the drums, but still have the attacks. And you kind of find this balance. And often people will take the, maybe they will accentuate the high end on the crush group, or put distortion on, so that as you blend it in, so those drums sound fine, but now we do the parallel processing and find that balance between the two. You can find that sweet spot, still have the attacks, and still have kind of the meat and beef of it. So whether you do it for a bass, you do it for a vocal, it can make things kind of pop out in the mix a little better. So that's what parallel compression and parallel processing can do for you. All right, so a question from Darren Flake. Hi, Greg. Is there a way to reduce memory usage in Cubase? I got Cubase settle at 256 buffer size using 32 gigs of RAM. I tested it on an empty project with nothing on, and the audio performance is still peaking. So one of the things that you could do, Darren, is, really check out, if you're on, I'm not sure if you're on Windows or Mac, but if you're on, see if you adjust the buffer size up, what happens. Also, there could be, if you're on Windows, there could be different system performances, different components of your hardware that could be interrupting and causing kind of CPU spikes. So it could be like a network card, it could be Wi-Fi, and there's a little utility called Latency Mon, LatencyMon. So Latency Mon, it's by Resplendent Systems, And if you're running Windows, this is a function that could actually tell you, if you have hardware components that could be causing interrupts into your audio performance. Now, some plugins, as you work with plugins, if you're doing virtual instruments, so let's say if we have something along the lines of Groove Agent SE, or if we're doing something with Pad Shop, or not Pad Shop necessarily, but let's say Halion Sonic, that are playing back samples. One of the things that you could also do is there's a balance for instruments that are streaming samples from the hard disk. So at this point, you could choose to say, okay, I want to use less memory and have it stream more from hard disk. So that may cause your hard disk to work a little bit harder, but basically it's going to load up less of the samples into your computer's memory and stream more of it from hard disk. So we could set that up in the options menu of Groove Agent SE. If we're using Halion Sonic, we'll show you where that's at, and other instruments will often have a similar type of setting if they're streaming samples. So under Halion Sonic, we can see very similar controls under the options key. So those are some things that you could do, and also if you have a project where, one track has 16 plugins, then that one track could cause your audio performance overall to be spiking, and it could be, it's like, oh, you have 4 tracks, but one track has 16 plugins. That, when often, how the CPU allocations will work with every DAW program is one track can only access one processor. So if you have, multiple plugins on one particular, you may get your computer to go to a crawl because, how that is threaded, and then every DAW basically works the same way. How that is threaded is that one track can only utilize one processor core. So it could be, I want to take this track, which has 16 plugins, and then I want to send it to a group channel. And this group channel, I want to run 8 plugins on the group and 8 of the plugins on the original track. And that could allocate the CPU resources across the processing across multiple cores in a better way. So those are some things to try. All right, so we see Jazzy Lamel. Wonderful to see you on. Thanks for joining us today. And it says, can you give us some tips and tricks on how to use the vocal chain with delay, reverb, and compression on the sends, but on input coming in? So generally, the vocal chain plugin does a tremendous amount. So let's say if I add a audio track here, so we'll call it Vox, and as an insert, we will put on a vocal chain. All right, so we'll just come over here, go to our inserts, and we see under vocals, vocal chain. Now, vocal chain has, since it can do all sorts of different processing, when we look at the latency of this plugin has a lot of latency. So I would say that this plugin is more intended for mixing versus recording or tracking through, because I think the latency is like 210 milliseconds. So if we want to go to this vocal track, so it's 238 milliseconds. So it's almost a quarter of a second of latency imposed by plugins. Now, how plugins do their magic is sometimes they have to do a lot of processing, and sometimes when it's doing your cuts, your gates, pitch shifting, delay, reverb, imaging, EQs, exciters, saturations, dynamic filters, de-essing, each of those processes, and we could think of it like a tax, like every time you want to do more with a particular thing, it could take more processing power. So if we are just tracking, we could go to your studio setup, select your audio interface. You want to make sure that if you have direct monitoring disabled, Then as we're recording on this track where this plugin is loaded, we would hear the effects of that plugin. But again, this plugin has a lot of delay, or it has a lot of latency because of its complexity. So with that complexity, this may not be the most practical plugin for tracking purposes. And once you put it on after the file has been tracked, at that point, it will do all of its magic, and Cubase will just offset the start of the playback of tracks so it's in time. But for the actual tracking process, I probably, this may, disorient your vocalist because of the high latency within the particular plugin. So. All right. Okay, then my chat field jumped. All right, so we see from Bratman Studio, when is the next Zoom meetup? So I think we do it like the last live stream of the month. So I think it's going to be a week from, sorry for hitting my mic. It's going to be a week from Friday. So today's the 20th, so I think the 30th. So if you're in the U.S., that's the Friday of Labor Day weekend. So, but yeah, so check out. So it'll be a week from Friday will be the next Zoom meetup. See, Matty Rojas says, you guys are the best for doing this. Such a great company. Yeah, we at Steinberg, we like our users. So help them out and use your product. Use your product better. So. All right, and we see Alexander checking in from Moscow. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so we see from Sable Winters, it says, question, I have a multi-song project recorded on tape, converted to wave, all parts on single tracks. How to range select and isolate to start and end of a song for separate projects. Hope this makes sense. So yeah. All right, so we could use cycle markers for this. We'll show you kind of an easy way of doing it, Sable. All right, so let's imagine this is a long song. So I'll just duplicate it a couple times. All right, hang on just 1 second. All right, so. All right, so let's say we have a long recording. So whether it's on multi-track or if it's like, let's say, we have our songs here. So what we could do, Sable, to kind of make this easier is we're going to add a marker track. Okay. So, and we'll just call this cycle markers or songs. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to kind of select kind of the start and end of the songs. So I'm going to say, okay, this is song 1, and we see a cycle marker. So I'm going to add a cycle marker. I'm going to hit the letter P. Sorry, so let's set the range. Hit the letter P. That will move the left and right locators. And then we could add a cycle marker. Let me just start over again. So come here, P, and then you'll see this add cycle marker. So let's say this is song 2. Hit the letter P. This will move to left and right locators. Add cycle marker. So let's say we just had a conversation. It's not in a song. We don't need that. Hit the letter P, cycle markers. And we'll come here. Let's say this is our song or last song of the set. So we have cycle markers. Now each of these markers we could label. So when we want to come over here, we could click on the label. So in the descriptions, we'll say Sable, and I'll hit the down arrow, is an awesome vocalist. Okay, so now these could be the names of the songs, whatever you want to do. So we have one audio file with 4 songs. This is one contiguous audio file, continuous file. And at this point, we could now break these apart. So we'll say, let's do our export audio mixdown. Then we could see our cycle markers. So we could now just come over, select our cycle markers. And then I'm going to export and put these into their own audio track. So we're going to break this one song that has multiple songs within it. We found the in and out points. Use the range tool, hit the letter P, added cycle markers, labeled it, and we come over here to our export settings, choose our cycle markers, export audio. And now each song is automatically a separate audio file with their separate tracks, and we could have different naming conventions if we wanted to. So if we wanted to automatically carry the name over, I'll show you how to do that. So we'll come here to our naming scheme, and I'll just say we want the cycle marker name. So now when we export audio, the cycle marker name becomes the name of the audio file itself. So you can see Sable is an awesome vocalist, or our names of our projects. So let me know if that's what you want to accomplish, Sable. See, Gerald Ely just says, thanks for the lessons in parallel compression, Greg. So you're welcome. All right, so we see Roland stuff. Just says, greetings, always a very late arrival today, but we'll catch up the last 3 hours after the event. Hope everyone is well. So glad you can make it. You just had to hit the like button if you're late. That's all. But thanks for joining us this evening. All right, so we see question, does Cubase have something similar to Luna's apply to all when selecting an insert? This feature does, so you don't have to select all the tracks to apply an insert to all tracks. So that seems to me like it could be problematic. I mean, like, would it apply the insert to every track, and would it apply it to every group? Would it apply it to every effects channel track? Would it apply it to every output? So there isn't, you would have to select, and I see where it could be, where you say, okay, do it to these particular tracks, add that. But, with complex routings, that could cause, a lot of issues. But, if you wanted to apply that to, So if we just select all these tracks, go to inserts, and just, just come here. So, while the tracks are selected, we could, like I may not want an insert on my stereo out to be applied, but you could just hold down Alt and Shift and say, okay, I really like the frequency EQ on all of those tracks. You could just do it like that. So I think it, I know it's an extra step to select your particular tracks, but I think there's more consequences of every track having an insert regardless of where it's at in your field. So I couldn't think of many times where I want the same insert on my master, my groups, my send effects, my instrument tracks, and everything, for the sake of, so I think it makes sense to be a little more deliberative with the selection, because then I think you spend a lot of time taking off processing on particular tracks. All right, so we see Karsten Lau says, hi Greg, I ran into a problem today with Spectral Layers 11 Pro. I simply can't make it loop the selection. As I recall, I've used it before. What am I doing wrong? So let's see if we want to do it as part of, I'm not sure if you're running it standalone or if you're running within Spectral Layers in ARA mode. So we just, select track. So, here I think that the transport is controlled by Cubase. So if we're doing ARA mode, here we could so let's say at the end of this it should loop because the transport's here. Then we'll try to let me just put it here and turn a loop on. That would help. All right, so now let's try it in standalone. Okay, so I think like if you have the so once we've made a selection, and then I think we just turn this on, that you could just activate the loop, but you might have to make a selection. Sorry, I don't have this audio routed out, but let's see if it just loops. So if you're doing standalone, make sure that you're doing it right from here. If you have a selection, you could then activate the loop in the transport. So you could isolate for different processing. So let me know if that makes sense, or if you're running it in a different way. Okay, so we see from Roland stuff says, hi Greg, is there a time-saving way to change the routing on a number of tracks easily? I tried doing this in the mix console, but couldn't see how to get it to work. Okay. So I'll add a number of audio tracks here. And let's go ahead and add, let's add a couple of group tracks so that we could do routing. Okay, so right now these are all routed to stereo out. So if I have these tracks selected, I could select these particular tracks, try holding down the Alt or Option plus the Shift key. And then all of those tracks, it doesn't look like it's working today, but try holding down Alt. Let me see if it's, just check my, all right, so as we come here, I hold down Alt or Options. Let's send these to group 1. And it's not working right now, but yeah, try just to, and let me just check. I may have, let me just see if it's the routing I may have turned off. So let me just try. I'll send these all to group 2. So yeah, let me just, nope. But I know it's the, try selecting the tracks and holding down Alt or Option, and then as you change the input or output, that those would all be carried over. All right, we see Gerald Ely has to take off. It says, great stream as always, lots to review and practice. Thanks, Greg. We'll see everyone back on Friday. Okay, so we see from J for Secret Studios, says, surprise, surprise, it's my third time really trying Project Logical Editor. It's starting to make sense. Would you please demo enable disable instrument, also within a folder, if it's selected. Okay. Okay, so let's just add. All right, so let's put these top 2 in a folder. Okay. Okay, so please demo enable disable instrument. All right, so if you want to enable disable instrument, you don't necessarily have to do it from the Project Logical Editor. There is a command, but let's go to our Project Logical Editor. So if we have our selected tracks, we could also treat kind of the Project Logical Editor as a kind of a macro creator. So let's say disable/enable tracks. So I could have a preset that does this. So we could do it on selected tracks. But let's say if it's in a folder, I think if we choose to select So let's come over here to insert. You want to say media type is equal to MIDI property. I may have to switch this. Is parent object is selected, and let's say all right, so right now we did media type is equal to MIDI, so I'm going to duplicate this folder. All right, so right now that's with the track open. So let's say I'm going to duplicate this folder, and let's see if it is, and we're going to add another condition on property is set to is selected. All right, and I may have to switch the order. Okay, so say media type. All right, let me just remove this. So say I don't think it's the Boolean. Okay. Okay, so let me see if we have the folder closed. All right, so let's see if all right, so we could come over here, let's say folding, toggle selected track. All right, so let's see. Okay, so let's say this is going to be closed. So we could have something like that, Jay, which would do that. So let's say now I have these particular tracks. So I have it to open up the selected folder, to then we're going to select MIDI. Let me just see if I remove that. Yeah, so you could treat it like this, where I opened up the project editor, then we took the MIDI tracks, and if the parent object is selected, and we choose to select those tracks and then disable those particular tracks. So let me know if that makes sense, or that works for you, or if you need this to close up again. But let me know if that works. All right, so we see from Darren Flake, what's the best way to tight audio vocals? Is there an efficient way to go of efficient gating way or upward compression for the matter? So not sure when you say tight vocals if that means like tightening up. So, you know, the Cubase does have a really good alignment on it. So let's say if we have vocals that are rhythmically loose, so at this point, we'll listen to. So if these are, we look at them kind of visually, we could see that the rhythmic nature isn't very tight. So I could select a particular file. We'll come over here. I'm going to add this as a reference. I could select the other files. And then we could have these as target files. So we could select multiple files, say align audio. And now when you listen to it, as opposed to and now when we tighten them up, so that's a great way of tightening up vocals, but let me know if you mean something else or if I'm misunderstanding. And if we see also, is there an efficient gating way or upward compression for the manner? So if you wanted to, let's say we'll group these, there's an upward compression in Cubase. Let me see if I can remember which one had it. So let's put these to a group channel. So yeah, you could use the squasher for like a multi-band up-down compression. So if you needed to do up-down compression, you could use the squasher plugin for that. All right, so you see question, is there a way to clean up my vocal, like reducing clicks and pops and remove silence and unwanted noise? So, you know, a lot of times, you know, ideally, you know, if you have clicks and pops, you know, if you have like lip smacks, like, and sibilances, a lot of those things you could get rid of, you know, using the vocal chain to work with that. So, you know, if you wanted to come over here, so let's say if you go to the vocal chain, you know, if you find yourself where, you know, you have a de-esser to kind of just come right over here, you could activate the de-esser, find the particular frequencies. There's dynamic filters. So if you say, okay, I really need to activate the dynamic filter, and at this particular frequency, I need to do, you know, more, you know, let's just come over here, adjust EQ. So you could come over here and do like, you know, dynamics processing just on particular frequencies where you need to do that. There isn't necessarily like a noise reduction, you know, plugin that comes with Cubase, but a lot of that is, you know, maybe gain staging so that you don't have noise. So, you know, it's easy to kind of have your gain structure set up to make sure that you don't have noise. All right, we have another question. How can I use ARA in Cubase? When I tried to ARA my auto tune, the track doesn't play sound anymore. Is this a common issue or just me? So I've never had an issue, and I've used, Melodyne in the past with ARA. But if you want to take a particular track here, and so once we have, let's say, our guitar. So at that point, so I'm not sure how you're running it, but if we just come directly here and from the inspector, you'll see under extensions, any ARA. I know AutoTune I think is fairly new to ARA, but if I wanted to run it in Wavelab, for instance, now as soon as I double click, it will go into the ARA editor, and I can want to do my Wavelab editing, or if I want to come over here and run it through spectral layers. Now when I do that, it's still playing, and we could do our processing and editing within ARA. So I haven't really had any problems with an ARA extension not kind of functioning and playing back. So okay, so we see from Sable says, Greg, we're getting there. We'll do that. We'll do that for each and all parts. Drum kit has individual mic tracks. What would that look like? All right. So let's say we have a multi-track scenario. So let's say we want to take our drums here. So I'm going to set my markers. Again, I'll just add a new marker track here. So let's say, or I'll just use our existing marker track up here. So I'm just, again, adding the cycle markers at the top here. Okay, so we have these cycle markers, and now when we go to export audio mix down, we're going to choose to export via the cycle markers here. So we'll just come over here and we'll say, let's export 7.8. So we're going to choose, say, export 7.89. So I'm going to choose to put these into our audio tracks. We'll say export audio. Just do multiple, and we'll choose our drums. All right, so now we'll come over here, export audio. And let me see if I put them into the track. Sorry, I may have messed up. But yeah, you can do it for multi-track. Let me just see if they're. But you would just see kind of the multi-track equivalents of all of those carried over. But yeah, so the same exact process would work for multi-track as well. All right, and I know we had a question sent in. Let me get to that. Before we run out of time. All right, so we had just a question. How to change a MIDI note endpoint MIDI in a key editor. For example, I'm doing a live MIDI recording of a piano, and sometimes I want to move the MIDI note endpoint on various special occasions and put its end on the grid. It does not work if the starting position is out of grid. No matter what I do, I've tried all grid settings. I can't succeed. What have I missed? Of course, I can use holding control and dragging. All right, so let's take a look at okay, so often when we are moving notes, so we'll come over here, let's look at this. Now we could kind of set, one of the things we could do, let's say we have a bunch of piano notes here. And these are all kind of maybe overlapping, and I wanted these notes to end on the grid. So it's not necessarily snapping. We want to keep the beginnings where they are, but I want these notes to end right here on the grid. So if we go to our quantize settings right here on within the MIDI editor, and if you don't see that, it's just going to be this little, it should be open by default. So, and then we can set our quantize value. So let's say I want this set to a whole note or quarter note. So again, we don't want to affect the beginning placement of the notes. We want that exactly where it is, but we may not want these notes hanging out over the beat. And then we could just choose to quantize not the start of the notes, but to quantize the end of the notes. And then that way the beginning starts exactly where it is. So I'll put my play position right at the start. So we can see that if I quantize the notes, let's say to quarter notes, the start position of the notes would change. We don't want that. We may want to have the chord rolled musically for typical piano stuff, but we could set the quantize value, and again, in our quantize settings here, and just quantize the ends of the notes. So we don't have to quantize the lengths because that may affect the overall lengths, but just quantize the ends of the notes. And then you could, without having to manually adjust those, and have it snap to grid. So give that a try. All right, let's jump back. Millard Brown just says, thanks, Greg, for all the great answers and tips. I'm glad it's helpful for people. All right, so we see Karsten Lau just says, so I guess I have to make the loop in Cubase then, as you showed. So if you're running it, when running it in ARA mode, the transport is going to be controlled, by the host application. So. All right, so let's see if, so I think we might be out of questions. We have just 2 or 3 minutes left. I want to thank everyone for all the great questions. I hope that everyone's learned a new tip or trick. We will be back on Friday, starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time, so that's 7 p.m. Central Europe. It is also going to be 6 p.m. London, 10 a.m. California time. See, Roland Stuff says, I've only been with you for half an hour, but learned loads. Thanks, Greg. So you're welcome. And if you have questions that you want to send in advance, you could send them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. I want to thank everyone for taking part of your morning, evening, afternoon, middle of the night to spend time and learn more about Steinberg products. And we'll see if any more questions sneak in. If not, we will wrap up. And we should have the index done. I'll take a quick dinner break. I'll see how my son's second day of 6th grade went for him. And then I'll start working on the index tonight. So we could navigate to all the great questions. And if you want to search for topics been covered in previous live streams, please go to cubaseindex.com. And it looks like we are all done with questions. With that, we will go ahead and wrap up. Everyone, please stay safe and healthy. And we will see everyone back on Friday, starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And we'll see you then. Thank you so much. Goodbye.